What's good, YouTubers and YouTubettes? This is JB Sports, back again with another one. Got some inside information on some upcoming summer boxing matchups involving Errol Spence Jr. and M.Garcia in separate fights. They're not fighting each other. I know when you said Errol Spence Jr. and M.Garcia, you're like, wait a minute, JB Sports, they're not finna fight again. Errol Spence Jr. dominated M.Garcia. He washed M.Garcia. Now we're talking about them in separate fights. Now the first bit of news that I have involving Errol Spence Jr. is that he will be in a unification matchups with Spence-Ugas. I know you're saying, wait a minute, JB Sports, that's not news. Everybody knows he's fighting Ugas next. But the fight has not been officially announced yet. Now it was supposed to be announced shortly after the Showtime summer boxing lineup got announced. Errol Spence Jr. got on the internet and said, hey, what's going on with the Fox boxing lineup? When is that going to get announced? Basically saying, what's the holdup with that? And a lot of people start speculating that fight will be announced shortly after. But several weeks have passed and still no Fox summer boxing lineup. But I'm here to tell you that the fight involving Errol Spence Jr., who will be putting up his IBF and WBC titles on the line versus the Super WBA welterweight champion, Spence-Ugas. That fight will take place on July the 10th. That's the date. That's the confirmed date. And the fight will be announced this week in lead up to the Luis Nery versus Brandon Figueroa bantamweight title matchup. That fight there is a Fight of the Year candidate. Don't miss that fight. That's going to be a lot of action. Those two fighters don't have the biggest of names in boxing. You know, Figueroa got a little bit of a name, due to his brother. But both fighters don't have the big name or the cachet, but this fight is going to be very exciting. Again, it could be the fight of the year for 2021. It's going to be right up there, in my opinion, with Chocolatito Estrada 2 this year. Now, that's probably the leading candidate for the fight of the year. This fight will rival that fight. So look forward to that matchup going down this Saturday on Showtime, Carson, California is where that fight will take place. Now, as far as Oxnard, since I mentioned that earlier, Oxnard native M.Garcia is said to be in negotiation with Filipino icon and future Hall of Famer Manny Pac-Man Pacquiao. Now, a lot of people were assuming that fight will take place on Fox pay-per-view, especially when they seen M.Garcia doing pre-fight analysis to the Andy Ruiz Jr. versus Chris Arreola fight. Many people thinking, well, he's back with Fox, and he's going to be fighting on Fox next. And I'm saying right now that that's not necessarily the case, as he's got a one-and-one deal with Eddie Hearn in Matchroom Boxing. He signed that deal prior to when he fought Jesse Vargas. That fight took place in Dallas, Texas in the early part of 2020. And it was a one-and-one deal, meaning that Matchroom Boxing will have first right of refusal to M.Garcia's next fight. So wherever, say M.Garcia goes to the PBC and Al Heyman and gets the deal for his next fight, Eddie Hearn and Matchroom Boxing will have the right to match that. If they match that, that will require M.Garcia to fight on DAZN and with Matchroom Boxing. So that's what that means. First right of first refusal. That's what that means. So M.Garcia versus Manny Pacquiao could very well end up being on DAZN. Depending on if Al Heyman and the PBC put up the money for that fight, and Eddie Hearn says, man, it's too rich for my blood, and says now he don't want to match it, then that's the only way that M.Garcia and Manny Pacquiao fight will be on Fox pay-per-view. With that being said, I think Eddie Hearn will match anything that any other promoter puts out there for a potential Manny Pacquiao and M.Garcia fight. Any amount of money that they put up for that fight, I think Eddie Hearn will match it. So I'm looking forward to that. M.Garcia next fight will definitely be on DAZN, and if his next fight is with Manny Pacquiao, that fight will be on DAZN. So that's a little bit of information that a lot of people weren't privy to, and I'm giving that to you on this video. So we will see what happens, and we will see what transpires, but that's the next potential matchup for M.Garcia. Now, if he doesn't get the Manny Pacquiao fight, there's several other fighters that Eddie Hearn can match up M.Garcia with. First being David Avanesian. that could be a potential matchup. Now, he's going to have to pay Michael Garcia some good money, because Michael Garcia has been saying for the last couple of years, ever since he pretty much got out of that Top Rank contract, basically that he wants to be involved in big fights. He said those are the fights that gets him motivated to go out there and run, go out there and train, go out there and spar. And he wants to be in a big fight. He just don't want to fight anybody, any run-of-the-mill fight. He wants to be involved in a big fight. So fighting a David Avanesian, who doesn't have a big name but has a big win in his last fight over another UK hype job, a guy that they was pumping up, calling the next Roy Jones, and David Avanesian put a dominating performance on him and stopped him in the first half of that fight. That could be a possible next opponent for Mikey Garcia. Another opponent that's pretty much a long shot, I think, but maybe a Conor Benn is a guy that they can match up with Mikey Garcia. But it seemed to me that they got bigger and better things in the future planned for Conor Benn. They don't want to put him in there with a veteran, a guy that's very good at timing, a guy that's been in a lot of big fights, a very experienced fighter. And Mikey Garcia, put him in there and he get overwhelmed by a veteran like a Mikey Garcia. I don't think they might want to put him in there with a fight of that magnitude this soon. And a guy that's not past his best, like they will be willing to put him in there with Amir Khan. Mikey Garcia still has a lot of good fights left in him, so I don't think they would want to do that. But that's maybe a dark horse candidate for a Mikey Garcia fight if he fights on the DAZN next, and if it's not the Manny Pacquiao fight. So we will see what happens and we will see what transpires. But that's a little bit of boxing news. Errol Spence Jr. versus Spence-Ugas will be announced this week in the lead up to Luis Nery versus Brandon Figueroa bantamweight title matchup that's going to be going down on Showtime Saturday night, again in Carson, California. And Mikey Garcia still has business to do with Eddie Hearn and Matchroom Boxing. Again, they have first right of refusal for Mikey Garcia's next fight. And if he gets the deal on the table with Manny Pacquiao with another network and another promotional company, Eddie Hearn can come along and match that and bring that fight over to DAZN. So we will see what happens and we will see what transpires, see how it plays out. Now, as far as the location for Errol Spence Jr. and Spence-Ugas, the fight's going to take place in Dallas, Arlington, Texas, right outside of Dallas, in AT&T Stadium, home of America's team, the Dallas Cowboys, aka Jerry's World. That fight will take place on July the 10th, a week after Chris Colbert takes on a veteran, Yorkis Gamboa, on July the 3rd, and a week before, undisputed at 154 pounds, involving the WBC, WBA, and IBF unified junior middleweight champion Jamel Lions Only Charlo versus the WBO junior middleweight champion Brian Castano. So that's going to be a hell of a 3-week period right there for Showtime. You got Colbert, Gamboa, you got Spence-Ugas, and then you got Charlo versus Castano. Trainer Derek James is going to be busy. He's going to be working the corner on July the 10th, and he's going to be working the corner on July 17th for his two top fighters in Errol Spence Jr. and Jamel Charlo. So he's got a busy 2-week span right there. So we will see what happens and we will see what transpires. As far as the location for Manny Pacquiao and Yorkis Gamboa, that fight could take place in the Middle East. But again, the Middle East is having problems showing proof of funds, as that's what's the hold up going on with the Anthony Joshua versus Tyson Fury fight. As Frank Warren, Tyson Fury's UK promoter, says until that money is guaranteed, basically until that money is in the bank, Tyson Fury is not signing his name on the dotted line. So that's what the holdup is for that. Now, Eddie Hearn might try to go to the same investors and try to set the stage for Manny Pacquiao versus Mikey Garcia fight. But first of all, he's got to get Fury AJ done, or push that back to the end of 2021. Maybe AJ fights Alexander Usyk, an interim fight, and then they revisit AJ Fury later on this year. But one way or the other, he's got to finish his business with AJ Fury, trying to set that fight up in Saudi Arabia. Once he's able to do that, then he can turn his attentions to putting on Manny Pacquiao and Mikey Garcia in Saudi Arabia. So if AJ and Fury gets done in Saudi Arabia, that would enhance the chances of a Manny Pacquiao versus Mikey Garcia fight taking place in Saudi Arabia. Now, if AJ and Fury falls apart and doesn't happen, and Fury goes and fight Wilder, and AJ goes and fight Usyk in the UK, then that pretty much will put a wet blanket on a potential Manny Pacquiao versus Mikey Garcia fight taking place in Saudi Arabia. Now, ESPN's own and Hall of Fame boxer Timothy Bradley said that Manny Pacquiao can't fight in the U.S. I don't know where he got his info from, but that's the first I've heard of that when he said it, because Manny Pacquiao's last 2 fights were in the United States. Adrian the Problem Broner and Keith One Time Thurman. Both of those fights were in Las Vegas. So I don't know where Bradley got his info talking about Pacquiao can't fight in the United States. I think he got his information wrong, just to be honest about it. But I maybe could see that maybe Manny Pacquiao doesn't want to fight in the United States. He's trying to fight in the Middle East, because the Middle East has got the potential to give him that bag, give him the money that he's looking for. He's looking anywhere between 20 and 40 million for his next fight. And right now, with the pandemic going on, it's nobody that's going to be able to guarantee him no $20 million minimum. He wants at least a $20 million minimum guarantee. And then had a potential to earn up to 40 million. But right now, you look at Canelo Alvarez in his fight against Billy Joe Saunders. He got a $15 million guarantee. And that was in Dallas, Texas, with the fans of 73,000 in attendance. And he said to make, when it's all said and done, up to 25 million. So he's drawing bigger crowds than Manny Pacquiao, and he's a bigger star right now than Manny Pacquiao. So for Manny Pacquiao to want $20 million minimum, and Canelo didn't even get that in the Billy Joe Saunders fight, it's we will see what happens, man. But I doubt if that happens. I doubt if he gets that type of money. But he's seeking that type of money from the Saudi investors, and maybe with Eddie Hearn and his connections with those same investors, and he's working with them. He's worked with them in the past, and he got the fight done with Anthony Joshua and Andy Ruiz too. Maybe he's able to get the AJ Fury fight done, and also the Manny Pacquiao and Mikey Garcia fight done. We will see what happens, and we will see what transpires. But that's the information that's going on. Latest in boxing. Hit the like button if you like the content of this video, and subscribe to JB Sports, the man, the myth, the legend, and I holla.